Hi, this is Scott Wilkinson, host of Home Theater Geeks. In episode 243, I chat with Inner Fidelity Editor-in-Chief Tyll Hersens about headphone pioneer Joe Grado and the different types of headphones. So stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Home Theater Geeks is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Home Theater Geeks with Scott Wilkinson, recorded February 12th, 2015. Episode 243, Headphones 101. This episode of Home Theater Geeks is brought to you by Blue Apron. Blue Apron will send you all the ingredients to cook fresh, delicious meals with simple step-by-step instructions right to your door. See what's on the menu this week and get your first 2 meals free by going to blueapron.com/twit. That's blueapron.com/twit. Hey there, Scott Wilkinson here, the Home Theater Geek and editor of avsforum.com. This week's guest geek is Tyll Hersens, editor-in-chief of InnerFidelity.com, and one of the most popular and one of my favorite guests on the show. Hey, Tyll, welcome back.
Hi, Scott. Good to see you as always.
As always, great to have you here. Those of you who are tuned in live at live.twit.tv or logged into the chat room at irc.twit.tv can post questions as we go along, and I will pass along as many as I can. So I'd like to start with a bit of sad news. A very important guy in the audio industry, Joseph Grado, passed away last Friday at the age of 90. And he started quite something here in the audio industry, particularly with regard to headphones. He started making phono cartridges and did that on his kitchen table in the mid-1950s. Moving then to his family's grocery business around the corner in Brooklyn, New York, where the company still remains today and makes all of their products 60 years later. Now, in 1990, they introduced their first headphones, and I think, Tyll, wouldn't you agree that Grado was one of the first companies to sort of bring audiophile a sensibility to the whole headphone market?
I would say, yeah. Certainly, I think Stax might have been around prior to that, and Stax early on with their electrostatic speakers made a name amongst audiophiles. And I think if I'd have to say what was the audiophile headphone at the turn of the 90s, it would have to be Stax, because they were high end. They were very expensive.
But they were also very expensive, and maybe that's what we should say Grado did, was to bring an audiophile sensibility into headphones that were much more affordable for a larger market, right?
Well, that's absolutely true. And he had a whole range of headphones, of course, from the Grado SR60, which was their entry-level product at the time, was probably $69 or something like that. And then they had the HP. I don't quite remember which came first, the HP 1000 or the HP One. The HP One was a headphone that had the switches on the earpieces.
Right. We actually have a picture of that to show everybody, which is kind of strange. It was a. I've seen it. I've looked around on the online, and it says HP 1000, and it also says HP One, in various places. So the model designation isn't entirely clear. But here's a picture of it. I'm pretty sure this was the first headphone that they came up with, and it has a switch on the side of each of the cans. What does that switch do?
It reverses the polarity so that of the headphones, so you can put them. Reverse polarity on the headphones, and at the time, at that time in the audiophile world, and still today to some extent, there was this controversy over whether absolute polarity mattered, and of course, on those headphones, you could flip it around to see if it did. So,
and basically, all that's doing is flipping the phase 180 degrees. taking the peaks
Right.
and making them troughs and vice versa.
Right. Right. Phase is actually kind of the wrong word for it, because phase can be, varied continuously, but a lot of people call it reversing the phase. Yeah. But flipping the polarity is more of a correct term. But they were a lovely headphone, very, very desirable. Some still say that it was the best sounding Grado headphone that was ever made. I think, and I may be mistaken on this because my memory is hazy. It was a long time ago, but I think there was actually something about a labeling mistake or something like that. So I think some of the headphones with switches had HP 1000 and some just had HP 1 or something. There'll be people who will be much more up on it than I, but they remain a lovely sounding headphone, very, very desirable. And in fact, Joe Grado, in his later years, had a small business modifying the existing HP 1s and HP 1000s out there to improve their performance. Now, I don't know anything about that. I haven't measured any of those or haven't had the opportunity to hear any, but he continued to work on that headphone right up till the end of his life. So
yeah.
But I think the big thing that he did was create a headphone that really did sound good, that was very inexpensive, that the SR60, and at $69, Corey Greenberg, I think, was at the time in Stereophile, who kind of made a big deal out of it, and said, look, if you're an audiophile and you'd like to turn somebody onto audio, get a pair of these Grado SR60 headphones. And so many headphone audiophiles, for sure, headphone enthusiasts started and got hooked on the activity because of the Grado SR60. It's a great little headphone. I have a version of it right here. This is a little bit modified, and this was the HF1. This was a special version. I think it's actually an SR80 or an SR125. I'm not really sure. Special version that was made for the first international HeadFi meet that happened in New York. So John Grado made the headphone for this particular headphone just for that event.
Wow!
And,
to compete,
and sold a few. I think they actually did it just as a kind of a promotional thing, and I think there was also a charitable organization involved. I think the Grado family donated some money to something. I can't remember what it was, but and then of course their cartridges, they for years have been known for making great good cartridges all around, but in particular great low cost cartridges. So I would say the family over the years has introduced a lot of people and brought a lot of people into the activity. So that's certainly done a lot for it. And I was sad to hear of his passing this week, and my condolences to friends and family. And as you say, they continue to be in Brooklyn, American made. Good on them.
American made after 60 years, and good on them. Almost working in the chat room says, I'm buying a pair of Grado SR80s next week. And off of Amazon, I guess. And I would suggest if you get 80s that you should use an amp, but 60s can kind of live quite happily without an amp. So if you get to 80s, make sure you get an amp that can really drive them nicely. And why is that? What's the difference between the 80 and the 60 that allows the 60s to work well by themselves, say plugged into a smartphone or something like that, whereas the 80s really benefit from an amp?
I'm not sure exactly what it is, but the 80 has always seemed to be a little harder to drive, and it won't have that snap and liveliness that the 60 has. But the 60 can't get much better with amplifiers, so it sounds good right out of the box and lively and a lovely sounding little headphone, but it doesn't get it as much better with better upstream gear as the 80 and the rest of the line do. Although I have to say, to be perfectly truthful, I'm not a fan of the sound of Grado headphones. Generally speaking, it's not my cup of tea. They tend to be a little bass light, and they tend to be a little brighter sounding, and that's something that is just not. I don't like very much, but
but that's more of a personal preference kind of a thing.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And I would still, the Grado SR60 is on the Inner Fidelity Wall of Fame still, because it's a terrific headphone for the price.
For the price, exactly. And we should definitely emphasize that you're at innerfidelity.com, which I'll say again at the end. And on that website is the Wall of Fame, which consists of all your favorite headphones, which I definitely recommend people go check out. I got a question from Cisco is my dog in the chat room. Do headphones improve sound experience for seniors as opposed to speakers? You may not have any direct knowledge of this.
I'm not sure I quite understand what the question is.
Well, for senior citizens who might have somewhat impaired hearing, particularly in the high frequencies, he's wondering if headphones will provide a better aural experience than speakers out in the room.
Well, so on a very fundamental level, no. Sound is sound is sound. So if you have the same level coming to your ears and it's neutral, then no, it should be relatively the same. Now, the bigger question comes in if you're talking about seniors watching TV with people with impaired hearing, and then people with regular hearing in a room in a home theater environment, for example, that can be very, very, very challenging and very difficult. And in fact, Sennheiser just came out with some new wireless headphones at the Consumer Electronics Show, and I don't think they're up on their website yet, but I think it's RS185. It's the top of the line version of their new. Maybe there may be a really super high top of the line version, but it's the top of the range of 4 of their new wireless headphones, and it has evidently a bunch of DSP corrections that the user can make that are specifically designed to aid people who have hearing loss in their speech intelligibility. So that one headphone in the top of their line is specifically made for people with hearing loss and seniors. And the advantage, of course, of that kind of situation is you can then the older person could wear the headphones in the room. Everybody can set the volume of the speakers in the room at the level they like, and then of course the granddad or grandma can adjust the headphones on their own. And hear clearly. So headphones work really well in group TV watching settings, for sure, for seniors. That's a really good way to use a pair of headphones.
Yeah. Hodor in the chat room says, at 55, no special hearing problems, but I distinctly prefer headphones for voice clarity. I think, if you do, then great.
Yeah, well, certainly, I mean, the headphones certainly have the advantage if there's no room acoustic going on. There's no, you do get rid of some of the outside noise, and it's kind of surprising how much that can change. So certainly you can concentrate better on it. And I think I've said on your show before that the high end of visceral impact will always be on speakers, and the high end of imaging will always be on speakers, but the high end of resolution will always be on headphones because you don't have a room in the way. So, so I that's kind of a basic statement, but I'll stand by it. Yeah. So there's some advantages in headphones in terms of clarity and resolution. You bet.
Compared to speakers, yeah.
As a general rule, sure.
As a general rule, yeah, exactly. Right. Subaru in the chat room is pointing to a piece on your site called 3 Modified Grados.
Oh, yeah.
I guess you took some Grados and either modded them yourself or had somebody do it or got some in that have common mods, or were those Joe Grado mods?
No, that article was and if they do a search on the website, In fact, the very first article I ever wrote for Interfidelity was because I promised that I don't remember who, but I promised someone if I ever got into this business, I would write an article about it. And there is a way to modify the Grado headphones. Well, first of all, I'll go back. That article, the 3 modified Grados, the first year at Interfidelity, I ran a contest where I would offered people to send their DIY modified headphones, and I measured them. And at the end of the year, I would pick the first, second, and third best measurements and give out prizes. And so,
Oh, cool.
So over the course of the year, as I got headphones in, I would put up little articles about them because it was fun, good for people to see their activities at work. But if you search on Interfidelity for modifying Grado headphones, there's a very famous modification. And this is actually a good segue into another thing that we wanted to talk about, was the type of headphones, because it has to do with the seal. But the pads, and I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see this, but on these pads, there's 2 different types of foam. This foam here is soft, and then there's another layer of foam that's a little harder. So this has 2 layers.
That layer of foam that's harder is the one that actually sits on your ear or contacts your head.
Right. And it's more like memory foam, and it's closed cell. And so the purpose of this foam is to seal against your ear. And then the purpose of this foam is to actually vent the ear pad so that it doesn't make as much change when it isn't seated right on your head. So if the ear seals and then unseals and seals and then unseals, if the rest of the pad is sealed, it will change a lot of the bass response. And there's actually a little diagram here where it shows you sealed headphones have the biggest bass response change. Then when there's leaks in the pad, it'll have less changes, and so on. So the design of the acoustics of the pad affect how much the bass changes when it makes and breaks the seal against your ear. But the important part is, the more sealed it is, the more bass you can get out of a headphone. And since Grados are a little bass light, one of the modifications that I found, and probably the best one that I've found personally, is just to run a piece of electrical tape around the outside of the ear pad, and it seals the ear pad, and it increases the bass by 3 dB or something like that. So,
which is not insignificant.
Yeah, it'll make a pretty marked difference in the way they sound. Yeah. So,
well, let me ask you this.
So this is an on-ear pad headphone. Go ahead.
Yeah, we're about to talk about the different types of headphones, because that's really what I want to focus on today. But I wanted to ask you regarding these mods that people sent in. Did you compare? Did you have a pair of unmodified headphones versus the mods that came in, so that you could compare by measurement what kind of difference the mods made?
In some cases, yeah. There's, for example, the Fostex T50 RP. It's a famous headphone for modders, and I have gotten stock versions of that headphone in, so that I have a baseline measurement for the stock headphones. In fact, that was one of the gifts at the end, was a pair of unmodified Fostex headphones, so they can modify
and somebody can then go modify them if they wanted to.
Yeah, have another pair to modify. But yeah, sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. The one that won, an Akai headphone, I believe, it sounded terrific. It really was. It measured brilliantly. It was a lovely headphone. Could be right in there with production headphones of today. And it was a 20-year-old headphone that somebody had lovingly spent a lot of time putting padding and damping in.
Huh, what do you know? Another headphone that I have heard is a popular one with modders is the Pioneer. Is it the SEA 1000?
I don't know that. I don't know that that's a popular one or not. Grados are a popular headphone for modifiers, but really, the guys who do it regularly, Well, first of all, I need to say that a lot of the guys who do it regularly have ways of measuring their headphones. Now, they're not industry standard accurate ways of measuring like I have, but they have microphones that they put in their ears. Sometimes they use their own head, and then they make measurements. So they have a way of getting objective feedback for what their modifications are doing. But I would say that after Fostex T50RPs and Grados, that I don't know that there's any like hugely popular headphone. The modders, the guys that are doing it to everything, because almost everything needs it. Headphones
almost everything needs it. Yeah, there's no perfect headphone.
Everything. Yeah. Well, there are almost zero headphones that have acoustic batting, right? Like damping material.
Okay.
Dynamat or the fluffy, padding, wool, acoustic wool and whatnot. All right. How many speakers have you ever seen that have zero acoustic damping or padding inside them?
Almost none. They all do.
Almost none. They all do. Of course. You need that. Well, almost no headphones do.
Why is that? How have the headphone makers missed that?
Well, I'm not sure that they missed it.
They made a different choice.
I'll be a cynic for starters and say that it wasn't demanded of them enough, so they figured they could get away with not doing it. Okay, so that's one thing, I think. Yeah, and that's changing now with people doing the mods and stuff like that. There's this sort of well-known understanding that you can make most headphones sound better just by putting a little melamine foam in there, or some of these materials. But I think the problem for manufacturers is, a headphone is worn on the head, which means it's exposed to moisture and sweat and things like that. And I think it's partly longevity, where they don't want to put it in there because it's something that can degrade. But I don't know. I think it's a bad excuse. I think they need to put it damping in headphones. There's a new headphone out here. This is a Sony Z7. This is an absolutely gorgeous headphone. This is really one of the most beautiful headphones I've ever seen. Beautifully crafted, very, very comfortable, gigantic drivers in it. And it sounds pretty good. Pretty good.
Okay, so when you said the most beautiful headphone you've ever seen, you're really talking about its appearance.
Yeah, this is a beautifully designed, beautifully executed. Replaceable cables that are very, very nice. They comes with balanced cables. You can optionally buy Kimber cable. Ray Kimber worked with Sony, and now at Sony on their website, you can buy upgrade cables for these headphones that are designed by Kimber Cable. I don't know if Kimber is manufacturing the cables or not, but Ray designed them in concert with Sony. So a lot of work went into this headphone, but there is no acoustic damping in here. And I don't know if you can hear it. I'll put this earpiece in here. It's very hollow, very talk. Also, when I scrape my finger, it's very, very loud. And if I think it, and I've heard some people already who've been modifying these things say that when they modify them, they sound great. So here's a headphone. It's like 95% done. But they just didn't put any acoustic material in there. They didn't,
And is that the mod that most people are doing, is taking it apart and putting that acoustic material in there?
Yeah, that's mostly what people do. Is they take it apart till they get to the cup, then they usually put some sort of mass damping material. I don't know what you call it, blue tack kind of stuff, but Acoustamat. There's various things they use it to stiffen it with mass, and then they put some type of foam in there. Melamine is one type of foam that's an acoustic damping material, but I I never do it because I have to review the headphones stock, right? So
Right, of course.
I've not played around with it, and it's a lot of work. I mean, it takes a lot of time, so I've not done it very much. I might do it with the Sonys because I, it's a good headphone, but it can be a great headphone maybe. So
So stock, it looks great. It's built well. It's designed beautifully, but you said the sound is pretty good.
it's pretty good, but it you know, the looks and just that I know the designers, a couple of the designers over there, and I know they're just working really hard at it. And then I also know that there's this ethic amongst headphone manufacturers where they don't put any damping material in it.
Mm.
And it's like I said, how many speakers have you ever seen without damping material in them?
Yeah, they all have it.
Yeah,
So
I'll have it.
yeah. So maybe we'll come to another renaissance in headphones at some point when the manufacturers realize that this is what will help make it sound better, and people are responding to it and even modding them.
Well,
they should do it themselves.
I don't know if you've heard of the new Audio Quest headphone, the Nighthawk, that Skylar
No.
Gray, Skylar Gray at Audio Quest. They showed it at CES, and it is one of the most well thought out headphones I've ever seen. He really has picked through a lot of details, and his headphone is made of plastic wood. It's
Plastic
literally
wood.
yeah, it's basically you take wood and you put it through this process, and it extracts from the wood the lignum or something. I think I looked into it one time, but one component of the wood that's essentially one of the material in the cellular walls of the wood or something like that. Anyway, and they can turn this material into pellets that work in injection molding machines like regular old pellets. So it's plastic, but it's wood, right? So
It has elements of wood in it.
Oh yes, it's one material that's in
Component,
wood. Yeah, one component of wood. And so it biodegrades. It has a lot of the acoustic properties of wood in terms of being dead. It has some advantages over regular wood in that the grain of regular wood changes the resonant behavior of the wood. This doesn't have any grain in it, so it's very dead in all directions. It doesn't shrink nearly as much as regular plastic, so you can make nicer geometric structures without having to worry about wall thickness and shrinkage problems, because regular plastic, when it shrinks, you have to have all the thicknesses of everything exactly the same, or you get these little dimples in it from shrinkage. Anyway, it's a really cool material. Well, anyway, Skylar uses this material, and then he puts a conformal coating, essentially a mass damping of a plastic, gooey-like plastic material, and then he has an insert of a damping sponge-like material in these headphones, and one of the Sennheiser headphones has a little a pocket machined in it. It was, I think it's the Amperior, had a pocket machined in it that had a chunk of foam for absorption, and maybe people have snuck in one in here and there that I'm unaware of, but for the most part, no, doesn't happen.
Well, Cisco is my dog is asking, does this material act as passive sound dampening, and also what's its effect on noise cancellation?
The plastic wood?
No, any kind of damping material. What we're talking about, generally speaking, in terms of why would you put it in there? How does it improve the sound?
Yeah, well, mostly it improves the sound because it prevents resonances. It makes the chamber lossy. So acoustic energy that's in the back of the chamber has to go through this material and loses some of its energy by deforming the material and making it wiggle around, and loses the energy as heat. Right. And if you have a chamber that's closed but none of this material is in it, it's like a bare room with walls. You can get echo between the walls, right? So you can get resonances. Well, this material, damping material, when you put it inside these chambers, reduces the resonant behavior of the chamber.
Got it. Okay, well, this leads us very nicely into different kinds of headphones, and this
Mm-hmm.
is one of the things I really wanted to talk about today.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because there are several different kinds, and I'm mostly interested in what your thoughts are about the use case, as it's sometimes called, of different kinds of headphones. Where are they most appropriate, or where are they best used under what conditions? So let's start with there are several different dimensions of this, shall we say. It'd be interesting to plot out a 3D graph of where different headphones lie. But there's one axis would be over ear versus on ear, right?
Right.
So tell us, give us a little sense of the difference between those. And I have a couple of pictures that we can show during that. The one
Well,
that says over ear and one that says on ear.
so certainly this is a an over ear headphone, large cup here that your ear goes in, and it seals all the way around the side of your head. So that's a Sennheiser HD800, and that's
Hmm.
an on ear headphone, and it's also open.
Oh, over ear, you mean?
Sorry, over here headphone. You're right, and it's also open. And I was going to show. You can probably see, still just
Oh,
barely see me, right through this acoustic mesh right here. So that's how
right.
open this headphone is. It's really a speaker being hung right in front of your ear without any acoustic encumberment, either behind the driver. There's the driver there, can radiate out, or in between the head and the driver. It's all open space right there. So
Mhm.
the advantage of a around the ear open headphone, you kind of got to take them at the same time a little bit, because there's so much difference between an around the ear open and around the ear closed, So
Right. And that's another dimension of the graph I'm thinking of, is
right,
open back versus closed back.
right. And sadly, that's not simple either. It's not just open back and close back. It's as I showed you before, how much seal there is between in this chamber next to the head. So this part, if it's very, very sealed, but then also how open it is to the outside through the pads, how open
Mhm.
it is to the rear chamber behind the driver. So the baffle plate where the driver is, there's way for air to get around the baffle plate to the back of the driver, and then
Mhm.
the chamber behind the driver and how open that is. So there's a number of acoustic spaces that can be open or closed, and some are semi-sealed and some are
Wow.
more sealed than others. So yeah, there's
So
a lot of
this is more complicated than a simple diagram. Okay, I got it.
yeah, I'm afraid it is. So that's a full-size open headphone, and what these are good for is it gives you a nicer sense of space, generally speaking. And when I say those sweeping statements, I'm really talking about the best in that class exhibit this kind of character. So
Right.
the best open full-size headphones, the best open circumaural headphones have this character of sounding really open and spacious. The downside is they tend not to have as much bass. If you want a good bassy impactive headphone, it's hard to get an open headphone that's got a lot of bass. And the counter example to that is the new Philips X2, which is an open headphone, but it has really a nice, strong not overly emphasized, but properly emphasized bass response.
How
So
did they manage to do that with an open headphone?
slide rules in science. I don't
All
know.
right. Yeah, well, somehow they managed to do it.
It's tricky. Yeah.
Quixton UK is asking, open equals less pressure in the ear?
Uh, well, not really. For a certain loudness, that's how much pressure you'll be. So 90 dB is a measure of pressure. So if you turn the volume to 90 dB, open or sealed, it's not going to make any difference in terms of the sound pressure level,
Mhm.
SPL, right?
Right.
So
Right.
90 dB SPL is 90 dB SPL is 90 dB SPL. However,
Yeah.
the difference is that when you close this thing and seal it up, and you have a driver that you're trying to get low frequencies. At the very low frequencies, this driver's got to push for a long time, and that chamber next to the ear has to hold the air for a long time for it to get that long, low frequency pressure wave up to the normal level. So with open headphones, they have a hard time. The driver has a hard time having enough excursion to keep the pressure high with the leaky environment that it's in. But on a sealed headphone, that driver can push against that chamber pressure, and so that you can get better low bass response. It is a pressure transducer. There is that part that's different about headphones than speakers. It gets very, very, very complicated, but it's something to the effect that a regular speaker is working on the basis of velocity and radiated area and stuff like that, and sends out a pressure wave that is propagated as sound through air, through space.
Right.
But a headphone is a pressure transducer where the volume is directly proportional to the displaced volume of the driver minus all the leaks.
Right.
And so it actually works. The physics of the level of sound versus the movement of the driver is different in headphones than speakers, because one's a pressure gradient, pressure transducer, and one's a velocity transducer. And I'm sorry, I can't make it any clearer than that. I'd have to break out the scientific papers and just read you something. But it's complicated.
Obviously, yeah.
Yeah, and so to answer your question, the guys at Philips, Rowan Williams, man, he's just a smart guy and figured out ways to do it. It's hard.
Yeah.
It really, 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 really hard.
And so what are the model of that one again?
That's the Philips Fidelio X2. And it's a great sounding headphone, just a little bit grainy sounding, but it almost beat out, in my mind, it equals, but it almost beat the venerable Sennheiser HD 600 off the wall. Almost knocked it off the wall, yeah. It was a little grainy.
Web 2951 asks, have you heard the new Audio-Technica M70X? And if so, how does it compare to the M50X? Why, look. There's a pair of headphones right there.
I think that's it. I think these are the M70X. No, this is the MSR7. No, okay. This is the MSR7. I haven't heard the M70X. I couldn't remember which ones I had in. The M70X were introduced at NAMM right after CES. So and this was at CES, but they didn't have that at NAMM. So I haven't gotten them in yet. Is the answer to that. I have high hopes. These are pretty good, but they're a little piercing, a little bit too bright. They have a little piercing spot, but still close. I got more evaluating to do on these. This is a full-sized sealed headphone. You can see there's no venting on the back. A lot of times they hide the venting, but that's a full-size sealed headphone.
Okay, so last question about full-sized or over-the-ear, circumaural as it's called.
Circumaural, yeah.
Headphones, open and closed. What are your faves?
I have to tell you, this is a surprising one. I have to tell you that my favorite headphone category right now is actually the on-ear sealed headphones, because I think there's a lot of them that are coming out and they're really nailing the right frequency response. But I'll answer your question, and I say at the moment I'm thinking sealed headphones are a little bit ahead of the game than open headphones. And because they're able to give a little bit of bass accentuation, and a little bit of bass accentuation is important for a headphone to sound neutral, in my view.
Interesting. So the measurement might not be flat, might have a bump up in the bass response, but that ends up sounding neutral as far as you're concerned.
Yeah, well, there is no way to measure a headphone and get anything that looks like a flat line that is anywhere near correct, right? You maybe can get close to a flat line, but it won't sound right. In fact, I just published an article. It should be it's still on the first page. I'm sure it's only one or two down. I just published an article about how to interpret headphone measurements, and it's very, very complicated. And the truth is that we don't know what flat is yet. We're getting closer. Sean Olive, who is the head of research at Harman International, has been working very, very diligently on target response curves for headphones. And one of the things they found is that you take a speaker that measures very, very well in an anechoic chamber, it's flat, and you put it in a room. Now that speaker is going to sound warmer than in an anechoic chamber, because below 200 hertz, you got some boundary gain for the room, right? So you're going to get some low frequency gain because of the long wavelengths at the low frequencies. And then as you go from mids up into the treble, the speakers narrow due to frequencies getting higher, and then the speaker begins to beam. And that means less power at higher frequencies is going into the room. And so there's a general warm tilt of a flat speaker when you put it in a room, just due to the sound power effects. Well, what the contention here is that human beings are so amazing in their ability to hear, really, that we know that a flat speaker in this room is not going to sound flat. So we think it's flat when it has those room characteristics. So we are used to these room characteristics, and we're used to listening to music in a room. And of course, music is designed to be played over speakers in a room. And so the theory goes that you ought to have a room gain bump below 150 hertz or something like that, and you ought to have a generally a downward trending frequency response away from flat, sort of 5 dB-ish over the range, not counting the bass boost, 10 dB total maybe, tilt. And as I said before, open headphones have a hard time getting this bass gain. Whereas sealed headphones do. And we're starting to see sealed headphones that have this room approximation. The NAD, Paul Barton at NAD has the NAD Viso HP50 that he calls room feel. And it has this bass bump in it. And the new Focal Spirit Professional is very close. The Shure SRH1540 is quite close, although it's a little bit smiley face, a little bit accentuated on the top and the bottom, but still close to the curve.
Are those all closed back sealed headphones?
Right. They're all sealed headphones. And the Philips X2 is an open headphone that comes somewhat close to this curve as well. Right. So are these among your favorite sounding headphones, the ones you'd like to listen to? In this category? Yeah. For casual listening, they certainly are. For casual listening, using it as a headset for my telephone, answering the phone with it, listening to music on the phone, watching iPad in bed at night or something like that. These are great headphones for that. Here, I'll tell you a funny one. Here's something that's counterintuitive, Scott. You might get a kick out of that. I should have brought it in. There's a headphone that I just recently reviewed called the Master Dynamic MH40, and it happens to have an extremely sealed pad, very, very sealed in this outside part of the chamber, which gave it this really good bass response. And these guys did a great job of voicing the headphones so it didn't have too much bass. It was just right. And these headphones, they sound – it's like everything is accentuated. They're very intense, dynamic sounding headphones. It's hard to describe it. But anyway, and one of the reasons why is because of this very, very tightly sealed area. It kind of has a certain sound to it, very immediate, in your face kind of sound to it. But the funny part is because you have a very tightly sealed area here, now this is a chunk of compressible air that's kind of up against the side of your head. And the when I first realized that this headphone that they had sent me had this character where because it was highly sealed, if your hair got in the way or glasses rims or it was just a little cockeyed, it would, significantly change the bass response. So that's one thing, right? That you had to get it on right. You had to get it sealed right.
Yeah.
But the other thing was, because it was so sealed, you can hear your heartbeat sometimes with it. If you tighten your jaw muscles, you can hear the muscle motor tension, noise from the firing. So it's what's a really bad part about these that have high seals is you get a lot of biological noise. Also, cable noise comes up and makes it louder. But here's the thing that I didn't realize about it. So I told the guy when I first got the headphones, the engineer, I said, wow, these things are really sealed. Have you tried getting a little bit of, leak in there so it doesn't react so much and you don't have so much of this microphonic noise? And he says, well, we really like it the way it is, And I says, well, okay, well, fine. I mean, I kind of like it too. I like it too, but you may want to think about that, having a little leak or something like that. Well, anyway.
So you don't have heartbeat stuff going on.
Right. So it turns out that they partnered with a fashion company, and they made a model that was the fashion company's version. And the guy says, oh, well, since I get a chance to do something new, I'll make a pad with perforations in it. Here's a pad that has all these little perforations in the outside. This is how you get the pads to leak through there. Anyway, so he used a kind of more open cell foam, and he put leaks in the pads for this new kind. They tried it out, and he didn't like it. Well, anyway, so not long ago, I called it because I saw this new model that had the holes in the pads. I called and I said, hey, did you try out leaky pads? And he goes, yeah, I did. And we didn't like it, And I go, wow, could you send me some of the pads? So he sends me the pads. And I measured it. It had less bass. I didn't like them as much. But the thing it had was it had more isolation.
What? You'd think it would have less.
Exactly. Now, why does it have more isolation when there's leaky pads? And the answer is, if the pads don't leak, then you got this pretty stiff suspension right here, and sound waves hitting the outside of the headphone pressurize the sound inside the headphone. So the sound isn't coming through a hole, it's just pushing up against the headphone. And because it's so tight, it's making you hear the sound.
So the outer casing of the headphone is acting like a diaphragm itself.
Right. The whole headphone is moving back and forth.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, when you put leaky headphones in there, it decouples that mechanical connection a little bit.
Wow.
And you get better isolation.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I would have never thought that, But then you see it and you go, well, of course it makes sense, The other thing too is on a really tightly coupled one like that, you can get some bounce. The headphone will bounce on that cushion of air in there. And so in the frequency response, you'll get a little bump at about 60 to 100 hertz usually from the pad bouncing and against the side of the head. And the Biodynamic DT48 was famous for this huge artifact in the frequency response because of the bouncing of the and that's happened because of the driver moving. So the driver is moving in at a certain frequency, it hits this resonant oscillation, and it just sort of starts bouncing against the side of your head. So anyway,
wow, very cool. Well, listen,
all sorts of weird stuff.
All sorts of weird stuff, and we're going to continue with some weird stuff in just a second. But if you'll permit me, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor for this episode, which is Blue Apron. Now, we all love to eat. I certainly do. Tyll, I'm sure you do. But it's hard to find a meal that doesn't compromise somewhere. Good value, quick to prepare, healthy and delicious. That's where Blue Apron comes in. Blue Apron makes cooking delicious meals easy and fun by delivering fresh, ready-to-cook meals right to your door. For less than $10 per meal, Blue Apron sends you fresh ingredients, perfectly proportioned, with step-by-step recipe instructions, including beautifully printed pictures, making cooking healthy meals really easy and fun. Hey, no trips to the grocery store and no waste from unused ingredients. Blue Apron is perfect for date night, cooking with friends, and they even offer family plans with kid-friendly ingredients so the whole family can eat well and have fun preparing meals together. Each balanced meal is 500 to 700 calories per serving, and so yummy you'd never know it. Cooking takes about half an hour, shipping is free, and the menus are always new. They won't send you the same meal twice. They also work around your schedule and dietary preferences, and Blue Apron's experts source only the best seasonal ingredients for incredible meals like warm kale salad with delicata squash and pearled farro. Holy smokes. Pomegranate seeds ricotta salad, or steak with ponzu dipping sauce and miso roasted hakure turnips and Japanese sweet potatoes. And my mouth is watering already. Hey, you'll cook incredible meals and be blown away by the quality and freshness. Blue Apron. It's a better way to cook. Check out this week's menu and get your first 2 meals free by going to blueapron.com/twit. That's right, 2 free meals just for going to blueapron.com/twit. And we thank Blue Apron very much for their support of Home Theater Geeks. So, Tyll Hersens of innerfidelity.com, we've talked about over-the-ear, or what is often called circumaural headphones, right, both closed back and open back. Then there's on-ear, which you alluded to a little earlier. Tell us about those.
Well, so we saw the Grado headphone earlier on. This is we'll call it a Grado SR60. It's pretty close to that. So this is an ear pad headphone, and you can see that they rest on your ears. And there's also ear pad headphones or on-ear headphones that have a round pad, but it sits against your ear. And you can see this is Sennheiser's, their 2 Urbanite on-ear and over-ear headphones. And if I can sort of get them next to each other, you can see the difference in the size of the pads right there. So on-ear headphones can have pads, little foam pads, and they can be fairly small.
They don't really seal as well as over-ear headphones.
Right. The pad ones, the pad ones don't seal as well. The ones with the foam pads, the on the ear foam pads, and those are normally considered open on-ear headphones. Then there's the ones like the Urbanite here that is on-ear but sealed, and it's a little trickier to get a good seal, but these days they're doing a pretty good job of with the pads and the memory foam and the materials that they're using to get just the right kind of seal on the earpad headphones. And earpad headphones, sealed earpad headphones, as I mentioned before, to me are they're coming out with some good sounding ones. For example, right here in the Urbanite, on ear and over ear, I prefer the sound of the on ear to the over ear quite substantially, in large measure because there's more bass.
Now wait a second. I thought the bass came from having a good seal around things.
Well, you can get a good seal on your ear.
Okay. All right.
Okay. You can get a good seal.
You know, I must admit, I'm coming at this from the Sennheiser 414s, for example, which I've had in my studio for many, many years. And they're these foam pad on-ear headphones, and they really don't seal at all.
No, but the new ones do. And for example, the new Beats Solo 2 has a terrific seal. It's also a very, very good sounding headphone. Beats did a great job on that headphone. Very good sounding. So remember how I said one of the issues here is if you have a driver of a certain size, you have to create a certain amount of pressure and hold that pressure in the chamber, even though it may be leaking, to get good low frequency extension, right? To get the low bass notes, you have to be able to pressurize this chamber in here. Well, This is just a bigger chamber than that. So
right.
it's easier to pressurize this chamber
Because it's
than
smaller.
it is now.
Okay.
Because
All
it's
right.
smaller.
All right.
So also any resonant characteristics, the bigger the chambers are, the lower the frequency of the various resonances. So as a headphone gets smaller, any resonant issues get higher and higher in frequency, which tends to be not, well, it can be troublesome, but the point is that it gets colorations out of the mid band a little bit better.
Okay.
So on-ear headphones can sound quite good, maybe as good as full-size headphones. Maybe not in the best in class versus best in class, but the categories certainly overlap in sound quality if you take them as a whole.
And what are your favorite on-ear or earpad headphones these days?
No, there's a lot. I do like the Urbanite. I do like the Solo 2. The Think Sound On 1 is a nice little on-ear headphone. It's a wooden on-ear headphone. It's a little uneven sounding, but it's got something really charming about it. Haven't been able to put my finger on it yet. When I do, I'll do a review, but it's a little bit of an elusive headphone. But there's quite a few out there. The Momentum on-ear is fairly good. The V-Moda XS on-ear is fairly good. So, yeah, there's a lot in that category. And, of course, they're smaller for travel and that kind of stuff. They pack up in a smaller amount of space, and they're convenient. So the thing about on-ear sealed headphones in particular is they're extremely convenient and really good for portable use as a cell phone headset or traveling headphones. Yeah.
You mentioned the last time you were on the show, you mentioned the Beats Solo 2, I think it is, as being kind of the first one that Beats actually came out with that sounds good.
Yeah. Well, I would say that actually their whole line, because they've refreshed like half their line and kind of tweak things around a little bit. And that whole new refresh that happened over the last year, I would say was a pretty sweeping improvement in general over the previous products, in sound quality, but also very much so in build quality. They've done a terrific job. They've really become a serious headphone maker, I would say, at this point. It's going to be well, and now with Apple, Apple's influence wasn't there previously. That was Beats doing it all on their own because they had the money to do it, and they, by golly, went ahead and did it. Good for them. So
yeah, definitely. So you think you think the improvement is not because Apple bought them? That happened before that transaction.
Sure, it takes 2 years to develop a product. So I mean, these products have been in development for a couple of years, and I had heard of starting maybe 3 years ago that headphone engineers were telling me, "Holy smokes, there's a lot of Beats people showing up at these conferences." So they've started putting money where they needed to put money in order to produce world-class product. And by golly, I would say that they're right up there with manufacturers like Sennheiser or Biodynamic or AKG or Philips. Or I don't think they're as good, but I think they're close. And I think all of those, there is no high-end, or there is no big headphone company that makes great headphones across the board. They all make stinkers, and then and they all make good ones,
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Billy Hot Dog in the chat room is saying, I'm anti-sealed headphones. The isolation sends my tinnitus into overdrive. I don't think I'd ever heard that before. That's an interesting statement. The tinnitus, which is ringing in the ears, which comes about when you have hearing damage, typically, and not for a long time afterwards. It can be temporary right away, but then years later, after exposure to loud sound, it can become permanent and really annoying. Have you ever heard of sealed headphones exacerbating tinnitus? I could imagine it if there's no sound going on. If you don't have a signal coming into it, then your ears are isolated, and really all you can hear is that tinnitus. But if you were to put music into it or sound into it, I would think that it would mask it, just like hearing it out in the open.
Uh, I guess the honest answer is I have no idea. I've not heard of anything like that before. The only thing that I've heard that's anything remotely like that is the Ambrose diaphonic ear lens. There's a guy who believes that in-ear monitors overpressurize with pneumatic pressure at the low frequencies, overpressurize the eardrum and can cause damage. That's an in-ear headphones. And I've certainly seen enough frequency response plots of in-ear headphones to tell you that many of them have way too much bass. I mean, way too much bass. And yeah, it could be putting a lot of energy at your eardrum. But I've not heard of what he's mentioning specifically. However, I will add, as I have moderate tinnitus in this ear. I shouldn't call it even moderate. It's more like mild, but it's there. That tinnitus reacts a lot to stress and to essentially to expectation bias. Right. So, I mean, it reacts to stressors. You can make it worse just by believing it's worse. So there may be some confirmation bias. You know, if he puts on headphones like that and thinks there may be something wrong, he gets a little agitated, and then it actually does make it worse, because of this, because of the stress. Caffeine makes it worse and all sorts of stuff like that. So, but I've not heard of anything in particular. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, let's quickly get to there's two other issues I'd love to discuss briefly. One is, you mentioned in-ear monitors versus earbuds. There's another dimension on this graph, if you will.
Right.
In-ear monitors, I think, would be considered the higher end of that, and earbuds, like what you get from Apple. When you buy an iPhone or whatever, would be considered kind of the lower end. Am I right about that?
Well, they're two completely different types of headphone. So the earbud is called an intraconchal headphone, which means it sits in the concha, the bowl of your ear. And the in-ear monitor is a canal phone, I think is what they call it in the IEC spec, but it seals in your ear canal. So the acoustics of those two phones, even though they're both very physically near each other and sort of the same size, are very, very different. And there's no doubt in my mind, as a category, that earbuds, intraconcha headphones, are by far the worst category of all headphones in terms of the way they sound. You don't get very much coupling. You have very poor bass response. They tend to sit all cockeyed and funny in your ear, and you can get little resonant peaks and things like that can make them sound harsh. And I would say that there are a couple of good ones, a UNPK1. I would say that the Apple EarPod, the new earbud they came out with, is actually pretty darn good for that type of headphone. So Apple did a real good job on that.
We actually have a picture of the old and new Apple earbuds.
Right.
I think labeled earbud. If we can show that, we'll be able to see. There they are. The older ones are on the right. Newer ones on the left.
And the if I can't see it, but it's the EarPod, so it's got that little snoot that has the orifice the sound comes out as off on the side. Is that
correct? Right.
Yeah, that's the EarPod. And then on the earbud, the sound more comes out the face, but even there they started steering it, and there's holes in there that try to get the sound to go into the ear canal. But fundamentally, those types of headphones just suck. And I think it's one of the types of headphones that is most likely giving people hearing damage, because they're trying to turn them up to get the bass to give it some kick or crank, and they're getting a lot of extra high frequencies that they don't really need. And it's really a bad idea. If you have kids, buy them good on-ear, sealed or something else. Don't let your kids wear earbuds, because it's not a good idea. And kids, I would steer them away from in-ear headphones as well, because ear hygiene is an important thing if you're sticking stuff in and out of your ears. And maybe one of these days we should talk about ear hygiene. But
we should.
Yeah. But the but little kids, the in-ears, they isolate so well that you can lose track of stuff your outside world. You know, you get inattentional blindness, right? So you're listening to music, you don't hear outside traffic, and you turn and you walk out onto the street, and bam, you get hit by a car or by a train, whatever. I mean, it's amazing the number of people that get hit by cars and trains and stuff like that because they got in-ear headphones in. So I would steer, for kids, I would get open on-ear headphones. And the reason why is because they can still hear what's going on outside around them, and you can hear how loud they're playing their music.
This is another good point. Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. And also, most portable players, they have volume limits that you can set. Find the pair of headphones that you're going to use your kid with, and then set the volume limit on their portable device so that it's not too loud. Give them enough volume so they enjoy the music, but not too loud.
Not so much that it damages their hearing.
No.
Which, as I said, often appears, decades later.
Yep.
So it's insidious.
Yes.
We have very little time left. One last thing I wanted to mention briefly is a type of on-ear, I guess, or around the ear headphone using a different type of driver called either electrostatic or magnetic planar. And somebody in the chat, planar magnetic, thank you.
Right.
And somebody in the chat room was asking what you think of the Oppo headphones, which are, I think, planar magnetic, right?
That's correct. They're very different. Usually planar magnetics have a serpentine conductor with linear bar magnets, and the Oppo has round magnets with a spiraling trace pattern on its diaphragm. So it's a little bit different. I like the Oppos. They're definitely one of those kind of things where it has to suit your taste. They're a little warm and laid back and kind of lush sounding. Okay, so they're not snappy and crisp and exciting and stuff like that. They're very, very relaxed, old school kind of sound. But I like that, So, you have to warn people. It is probably too laid back for most people. They're coming out with a small one.
Oh, they're coming out with a smaller one?
Yeah, a PM3. That's a new one. I haven't heard. I've seen it yet, but
planar magnetic as well.
Yep, they're all. Yep.
What about the Hi-Fi Man? I know they recently came out with some planar magnetics. I think they're not electrostatics.
Right. They have a new one called the HE1000. Fang Bian, who's the CEO and founder of Hi-Fi Man, has his PhD in nanotech. Well, in I think it's chemistry with a focus on nanotechnology, and he made what he claims is the first nano thickness diaphragm. And it is a planar magnetic headphone. Heard it at CES, and wow, did it sound good. Really, really good.
Well, there's so much to talk about with headphones. As you say, hearing hygiene or ear hygiene is another one. Let's get you back, in a little while, and we'll talk about that because that's so important and something that is near and dear to my heart. I write about it as much as I can, at telling people you really should protect your hearing because that, once it's gone, and there's nothing you can do about it.
You want me to give you a little spoiler?
Sure.
Do you have a neti pot?
Very good. I do. I
do
actually. I do. Absolutely. My wife is into. She's a health specialist in the voice, and so breathing steam and irrigating your passages with a neti pot, which is basically a sort of a teapot-like thing that you actually, pardon my French, snort in water in your nose and have it come out your mouth, and really cleans out the sinuses really, really well. How does that affect hearing?
Well, it ungums your eustachian tube.
Well, okay, I'm going to leave it at that. And as a teaser for when you come back, which you will, I have no doubt, and we will talk about ear health and hygiene, because that's very important, along with protecting yourself from overly loud sounds, which we've touched upon today. Yeah. But we can certainly, there's a lot more to say about it. So, unfortunately, we've run out of time. I got a question about bone conduction headphones, which maybe we'll talk about another time if you have any any experience with that, because that seems kind of interesting as well.
Yeah, I have. They're interesting.
Okay, good. We'll talk about it next time.
Good, but they're interesting.
All right, excellent. Well, I want to thank you so much for being here and talking about headphones so beautifully, as you always do, and gives us a lot to think about. So thanks so much for being here.
It's always a pleasure, Scott. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure entirely. Now, of course, as we said before, you can reach Tyll Hersens at innerfidelity.com, where he is the editor-in-chief and chief bottle washer and manager of the measurements and listener of the headphones, and really, really an excellent resource for anybody interested in anything to do with headphones. Definitely, I always send them to innerfidelity.com. You can find me at avsforum.com. You can email me at scott@twit.tv, and you can follow me on Twitter at htgeekscott and at avsforum. You can always find previous episodes of Home Theater Geeks right here on twit.tv/HTG and on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/twit Home Theater Geeks. Now, don't forget that starting in March, Home Theater Geeks will move to its new time just a half an hour earlier than it is now, 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock p.m. Pacific time, 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern time, starting on the first Thursday in March. So mark your calendars. I don't want to miss a minute, I'm sure, of Home Theater Geeks. Next week, my guest geeks are scheduled to be Ron Williams and Jeff Tully. Both will have just returned from the Hollywood Post Alliance HPA Tech Retreat, and they will have a ton of stuff to share with us about that annual meeting, I am sure. So I hope you will join us for that. Until then, geek out.